My friend Shannon Clarke is here. She is a coach. She is a mother. She is amazing. She is everything. And I told her that we were talking about frequency and energetics this month. And one of her topics of expertise is joy. And so I thought I'd invite her to have a conversation about the frequency and the energetics behind
Mm.
joy. So here's Shannon.
Oh, I'm so excited. I'm so excited to just have this conversation with you. And I don't even know where to start. Do you have like questions that you guys have been exploring that I can begin to answer?
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about your background and how you started working with people and started to explore your own joy.
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. Well, in order to really understand why I'm so passionate about joy, we have to like rewind to my very first experience of school, like my not kindergarten, but after, like when I decided to go to university. I had this amazing mentor in high school who was a phys ed teacher, and she she taught me all the time about like what it was like to actually see someone's potential that they could not see in themselves. I always say that mentors, the best mentors, can see your potential and then some. And that was her. And so I really wanted to be her when I grew up. So I went to university for phys ed, intending to be a phys ed teacher and like be that fun teacher in school that was like trying to stretch the boundaries of what, beyond just fucking dodgeball. Oh, sorry, I swear. Are we allowed to swear?
There, be you. This is you.
This
This
is
is a
me.
place where
Okay.
you can be
Sometimes
you.
I drop the F bomb and it brings me a lot of joy. But what I really was interested in was actually not like the science of why someone begins to learn to throw or the physiology of what it means to be a good athlete, but like how it feels to feel the sense of belonging that can come through sport and physical activity. But as it turned out, I decided shortly into my program that being a teacher wasn't really what I wanted to do. And the only other option that seemed to make sense at the time was studying recreation and leisure studies. So my degree, my first degree is actually in play. It's in play. I spent
Amazing.
my whole life, my whole undergrad, learning about like how play changes over life and what does it actually mean to be in flow. I think I actually did an entire course on flow. And we hear the words all the time, like find your joy, follow your bliss. Like, we throw the word around, this flow word, but it's sort of these ideas that are really out there. So that was sort of where I began. And as I've like moved through life, what really called me back to doing this work now, because it's been close to 3 decades since I did my undergrad. Oh gosh, I am getting to be older and wiser, and what a blessing that
Wiser.
is. But what called me back to doing this work now was my own experience of really being very far from joy. So I had an experience of massive, massive burnout about 7 years ago. So I was identified by the doctor as being totally disabled and unable to work. And that felt like I was an experience of like where I'd never laugh in a single day. Like I would be in my job not laughing for weeks on end. And to me it's like the most simplest experience of being human is this experience of sharing a smile and laughing. And we're like really laughing, like when you're having the best time with your girlfriends or your friends and you're just howling with laughter. Like I couldn't tell you if I had experienced that. And so I took time off work, and as I was recovering from burnout, one of the very first strategies that my therapist asked me to try was to laugh every day. That was it. That's like 2 weeks of just laughing every day. And it started with like hilarious videos of, parenting memes, which were so relatable, and just beginning the process of actually looking for laughter, like making myself laugh. It wasn't like, okay, I'm going to wait for something funny in order to laugh. No, I'm going to go out and look for something funny to laugh at. And the laughter process was stimulating all of those good hormones that our bodies need and that mine had been so missing, right? So the second step that she had me go through, in amongst other things, like unpacking all of my conditioning around sacrificing myself and blah, 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 that, like all that stuff, right? But like the practice that she had me do was to write a list of like everything that I'd ever wanted to try ever in my whole life, but that I had never tried, because I've tried a lot of stuff. Like I have literally tried so many things. I've skydived, I've been in an African hand drumming group, I've been a human mascot, like I've
I
done a lot
love
of
it.
stuff. But she wanted me to like do something I had never done before to unlock like hidden serotonin in my body, right? Like to unlock these like hidden hormones, hidden chemicals that my body was craving and that I needed in order to heal. And so I had always wanted to sing in a choir. Like I used to make music. I played the flute for a long time. And there's something about making music with other people that is like magical. Like my whole body can still feel the vibration of being in the music. But I don't play the flute that much anymore, and so I can't join an orchestra. But I have a voice, not that it's very good, but anyone can join a choir depending on the choir. So the NAC at the time, so the National Arts Center here in Ottawa, had, I think it was a pop-up choir, so anyone could come, and hundreds of people were there over the lunch hour, and they would just hand you out this sheet music, and you stand there and they'll teach you how to sing a song as a choir. And so we sang Chain of Fools, I think, which is by Aretha Franklin. And I was there with like 300 people singing this song. Aretha Franklin had just passed away, so it was like super meaningful. And I had to actually make a very deep commitment to go to that thing. Like I had a little guy at home at that time, and so I had to find childcare, and that was going to fall through. And I was like, oh, I could easily just not go. And it was an active choice to say, okay, no, I have to put this like devotion to joy and finding new experiences above everything else. So, in the processes of healing through burnout, which took, longer than I would have expected, um, I discovered my own interest in wanting to help other women like reignite their spark and reclaim their confidence and their sense of purpose and their sense of like actual vibrancy, like their radiance, right? And so I've been doing this work around joy for the whole time. Like when I started my business, my very first group offering was on finding joy in the ordinary. And this was like full on COVID time. So, nobody was really finding a lot of joy. It took a lot of effort. And so for the last 3.5 years, I've been teaching people how to find joy in basic moments, like really basic moments. So that's kind of how I began and where I started.
That's amazing. I cannot stop smiling. When Shannon and I get together, we have like a permanent smile on our face because
We do. We do.
we understand each other.
We do.
And so
Yeah.
to hear your story of where you started and to this Shannon that I know that's always smiling, that has always something funny to say, or it's amazing, and I love that. So how do you recommend closing that gap? Like, it sounds like you made a decision. Instead of letting life happen to you, you went out and in search for the joy.
Yeah. I mean, yes. I think there is this opportunity that we always have to make choice. And I'm sure you've talked about this a lot. If you follow Amanda on Instagram, you know that you are all about like choosing the life that you want, like stepping towards how you want to feel. And joy isn't different, right? Like obviously there's exceptions, right? Like when you're in the depths of depression, joy is going to feel very far. And I'm not going to say to anybody who's experiencing that kind of thing that you just have to choose. You just have to choose joy, right? Like we're not talking about that. But let's say that you are generally healthy, generally have a baseline of like health, but you want to thrive, right? Like then we get to that it's in those moments where we want to begin to look for the good. So again, like knowing you and all of the work that you talk about, our brains are going to look for what we ask them to look for. They're like computers, and you're the programmer. You're programming your brain, and you're like boop 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 input, look for joy, and your brain's all of a sudden going to be like, where's joy, right? Like that's how our brains work. They're pretty primitive structures in a lot of ways, right? Like they're programmed to feel afraid and keep us safe, and they're programmed, that's their programming, that's their like, their basic programming, unless you ask them to do something else, unless you challenge yourself to look for something different. You're going to look for the possible threats that there might be around, right? So that's when we start having those conversations that I think are really common about, choosing love over fear, or choosing desire over fear, and amplifying your desires and what you really want to experience. But let's say we're in the business of like wanting to feel more joy. Well, one of the things that I have really deeply embodied and really highly speak a lot about is the idea that like when we begin the process of looking for joy, more joy happens. You become magnetic to more joy because you're looking for joy, right? And you act differently when you're looking for joy. The interactions you have with people are different when you're looking for joy, and especially if you're like me and you really don't have like a filter as to who you share your joy with, like I walk on the streets often and I'm like, oh my gosh, isn't it an amazing day, to anybody
I'm
who's
like
around me.
that.
And maybe it's because, I have a lot of time freedom that not everybody has. So I'm out and about with other people who have chosen to have this similar time freedom. Maybe it's retirees, and everyone who's out in the middle of the day when I'm out in the middle of the day is like equally as like able to move slowly, right? So in order to find joy, if we were to like backtrack, like before we can actually look for joy, we need to be aware that we need to make space for that to happen, right? Make time for that to happen. And I said the words make time, but what I really mean by make time is slow time down. Slow down so much, not for like hours at a time. This doesn't have to actually take a lot of time, but like give yourself 1 minute, let's say 1 minute every day to look for joy, to love that 1 minute. And I'll tell a story about that experience. I love to tell stories. Amanda will tell you that. Like love stories. But one of my, again, like most impactful learnings was in reclaiming my own joy when I was living in Edmonton. My husband's in the army, and so we move a lot. And we'd moved to Edmonton, and he was deployed immediately to Afghanistan, and he was gone for 10 months. And Edmonton in the wintertime is really dark and really cold. And I didn't like my job, and I didn't have any friends, and my husband was at war. And, there was a lot that I could talk about that I did not like. I actively hated Edmonton. I really missed home. Ottawa is home for me. I missed all of our trees and our big, beautiful lakes and, the prairies. I wasn't finding anything to be happy about in Edmonton. And there was this one like beautiful day in the middle of the winter after Dan had gotten back. So this was now 2 years into living in Edmonton, and I was actively hating it with like every fiber of my being. And my best friend was visiting, and it was a beautiful winter day, and we were going to go cross country skiing. And all I could do was complain about the state of life, that basically Edmonton wasn't Ottawa. That was basically it. And she said, Shannon, did you ever think that maybe it's not Edmonton that's the problem, that it's you? And I was like, oh, bitch, I hate you. But of course, in only the way that a best friend can do,
Of
someone who's really
course.
close to you, you're like, okay. I didn't want to listen to her in that moment, but like a couple of days later, and this idea had percolated. And so I decided, again, it's like this choice that I made to choose to find 1 minute every day that I could like, just one. Because really, I was hating every minute. And I started a blog. At that time, blogs were kind of cool and fashionable. And I was like, okay, I'm going to start a blog called Love This Minute. I'm going to share my stories about loving the minutes. It was more to keep myself accountable to something. Nobody was reading my blog, but it didn't matter. I liked writing about it and sharing pictures. And I spent literally within 2 weeks of choosing to look for 1 minute of love, of things to love about Edmonton, everything about Edmonton changed. Everything. You know, the city didn't change, but my perspective had. And I think that just goes to show again, like we are very able, our brains are actually capable of shifting perspective quite quickly. So, you know, in order to find joy, find happiness, find optimism, find hope, it is a choice, and it is going to take, you know, time, but not much more than a minute a day, shockingly, right? And so when I, in this iteration of me now, and when I work with clients, we always talk about these little practices like loving just 1 minute of every day and what is one thing you can notice. But we get to ask ourselves every day, like, what would bring me joy today? You know, to actually ask yourself, what will bring you joy today? What are you excited about today? What will make me feel proud of myself today? So that at the end of the day, in the moments in bed where the mind likes to go to all of the dark places, you know, if you're like me and your mind is busy at night, you know, you already have fueled yourself with opportunities to reflect on these beautiful moments, right? These beautiful moments. The things that bring most people joy would surprise you. They're not huge things. They're bodily sensations. So you asked to talk about the energetics of joy. And when we talk about like how joy feels in the body, it's going to look different for everybody, right? What's going to stimulate your joy, stimulate your body to open into pleasure, which is what joy is, right? To open into pleasure will be very different from person to person. I ran in the beginning of this year a challenge, we'll call it, called Euphoria. And our challenge was to like quest for joy for 45 days. And we explored like what are the things that immediately bring you joy, like without having to think about it. And everyone's was different. A lot of people talked about smells, right? Smells of like one person described, you know, the smell of walking into her house after her slow cooker has been going all day and she knows she doesn't have to cook anything and the food is just like wafting, like food, the smells of food, taste of food, you know, you can almost taste those meals that you've loved in your life, the smell of coffee, the feeling of a warm mug in your hands. Obvious, like almost everybody in the group of people that are attracted to me love nature, so you know, the idea of like being in nature and seeing flowers blooming or the smell of baking pine needles or hearing bird sounds, it's very sensory. The experience of joy is a sensory experience in the body. And so again, like if we were to slow down, to take a minute to and then look for something that's going to evoke joy, you know, evoke joy and evoke our pleasure, it's going to like require that we're relaxed a little bit, relaxed enough that our bodies feel safe to feel pleasure, to feel the sensations of joy, right? And that might be literally closing your eyes on your back deck and feeling the wind, the warm wind. Today the sun was out and it hasn't been out. And so I was just enjoying like the warm sun on my skin and the sound of the trees and the sound of the birds and yeah, really like the feeling of warmth. So when we talk about the energetics of joy, sometimes I think there's an expectation, and tell me what you think, Amanda, of ourselves that we are going to feel joy 100% of the time. And then when we're not feeling joy, we think there's something wrong. Tell me what you think of that. You know, has that come up at all in the conversations you have had?
For sure. So, especially with that expectation. And
Yeah.
then we make it, and it's not only the expectation, it really comes down to your identity and the lens with which you process what is happening. right?
Yeah.
Because you're making it mean something about yourself.
Yeah.
And that's where we get stuck in a cycle and in a loop.
Yeah. Yeah. So when it comes to joy, we need to imagine that it's like the ocean. It comes in waves. The waves come in and they go out, and they come in and they go out, and they come in and they go out. And sometimes it's high tide and the waves are closer and bigger, and then they're receding and they're gone for a while, and then they come back again, right? So we get to like give ourselves this like compassion and grace for the times when we don't feel joy, right? To not make it mean that there's a problem, that we're doing something wrong, that there's that you're not making the right choice, right? So, I think that it's really important to be kind to ourselves in the moments where joy isn't as tangible, right? Let's say, one of the things that I was noticing, my mom passed away during COVID, and this was a really difficult experience because I love my mom and she was my person. I talked to her every day. And in grief, joy was hard. It was harder to find joy. And yet, when I surrendered myself to the experiences of grief, joy was right there on the other side. It's always just sort of under the surface. But so when I like to imagine joy and on the spectrum of like emotions, some people like to describe joy as being like a high frequency emotion, right? Like a high frequency emotion, happiness. When you're in your happiness, when you're in your joy, when you're in your pleasure, you're vibrating at this high level. And so, in some ways, I think if you were to visualize where that lives, it's like outside of you, somewhere up here, really high outside of you. I like to imagine that joy actually is underneath the surface, that it's like a tree. A tree has equal amounts of roots under the ground. That's where it draws its nutrition from. The roots are what actually connects it to the ground. It's rooted, it's grounded. And we can draw joy up, and it's our joy that actually is going to keep us strong in the moments where, there's a weather and a storm is happening and the wind is blowing through, or maybe, it's like baking hot with pressure, our lives, right? It's like blasting down at us from all directions. And what we really need is just a break. Well, we can just remember to like go under the surface. Like, we don't need to fight to find joy outside of us. It's actually deeply rooted within us, and we can pull out the strength and the resilience that we need. So in a lot of ways, like, I imagine our joy as being actually a protective force. It's a protection for us because we will always be able to tap into our joy if we imagine that it's not somewhere outside of us. It's always within us, and we just need to give ourselves opportunities to access it through, those like one little minute here and there of like moments to sink into the sensations of the body, and boom, there's your joy right there.
I think, well, two things. One, when you were saying, there's a famous quote from Bruce Lee that says, like, slow down to go faster.
Yeah.
And for the longest time, that quote frustrated me because I couldn't figure it out. I'm like, what does it mean, slow down to go faster? Slow down? What? Slow down? How? Slow down? And then I looked at it, and he was talking about presence.
Yeah.
The more presence that you can bring, you can change time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you can change your relationship to time. And in changing time, well, you can go faster, you can go slow, you can do anything because you are no longer in what you think time should look like.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we could do an entire other conversation about deconstructing the concept of time and like
Yes,
reframing
I'd
time.
love to have that conversation too.
There's a Mary Oliver poem. So one of my greatest joys is in poetry, and that's so evocative of like beautiful pleasure. And Mary Oliver, she writes a lot of poetry about nature. And there's one poem she has that's called When Death Comes. And there's one line in that poem that says, "What if time was no more than an idea?" And then she says later, when death comes, I want to know that I have been a bride, groom, married to amazement. And I think of that, I'm like, oh, I want to be married to amazement my whole life. What else is life about if not to be married to amazement? In which case, all of this rushing and feeling like we don't have enough time, or that we are, falling behind in our lives because we haven't achieved the goals we want yet and we thought we'd be further along, none of that matters. None of it really matters if we allow ourselves to realize that we are in this human body in order to like take in the beauty of the world, like take in the beauty that literally is everywhere. There's beauty everywhere. you know
Yeah.
Even in the mess. I
Well,
live.
even in the sadness, as you talk about,
Yeah.
and even in the despair, even in there is a beauty in that.
Yeah.
Right?
100.
Like look at Adele. She's like taps into that and she's a multi-million dollar singing
Taylor Swift, I
sensation. Taylor,
mean,
right?
he's
You
like, Taylor
yeah,
Swift built a dynasty on like grief, effectively,
yes.
heartbreak.
So many musicians. And it's because they tap into that emotion that everyone has resonated with at
Yeah.
some point in their life. And
Yeah.
in that, you see, hey, you're not alone,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And in that, there's joy.
Yeah. 100%. There's a lot of comfort that comes from realizing that you're not alone. And also when we surrender ourselves and stop fighting those more difficult emotions, the ones that we're more likely to judge ourselves for having, then they don't persist quite as long, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's the other phrase that we hear often: whatever you resist persists. And our
Yes.
emotions are like that, right? Like, we were resisting our anger, well, then we're probably going to find more anger. We resist the frustration and we're going to feel more frustration. But if we can like soothe ourselves in those moments, I speak about joy, but I also speak about self-compassion. And compassion means to suffer with. It means calm is like with, and passion is to suffer, right? And so when we allow ourselves to be with ourselves in those deeper emotions, those might like more difficult emotions, then we're more likely to return to joy with more ease. Not that, it might not, it's not to speed up the process. This was one of the other kind of interesting things. I think, when we talk about joy, we have to talk about everything. You can't just talk about joy. You have to also talk about all the other things. Because, what if you only ever experienced joy? Would you even appreciate it if you hadn't experienced the opposite of joy, right? So we have to actually be allowing ourselves to feel the opposite in order to know when we're joyful.
I literally wrote that down to say next.
Hilarious. See, this is what we made. We're like in each other's minds. Yeah, you can't just talk about joy. It really is like impossible to talk about joy without acknowledging all of the other things. Not if you want to actually be hmm, authentic about the human experience. The human experience isn't all joy all the time. Even though I speak about joy and I, smile a lot, I also cry. I also talk about sadness. I also, I'm pretty open about grief experiences and all the things that are hard about life, because we need to be real humans, and every real human has all of the emotions. They do. We just do.
Absolutely. And also, it's in the contrast that we can really see, right?
Yeah.
Like, if everything, as you said, was always joyful, we don't know what it's like not to be in joy.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you lose appreciation for that. And then
Yeah.
you get to the contrast of it and you're like, oh, wow, this was joy, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you can't see the stars in the daytime. You need that night. You need the
Yeah.
darkness, right? We're in a
Absolutely.
dualistic world, the masculine, the feminine, the up and the down, yin, the yang,
Yeah.
all of it. So to have joy, there needs to be also the opposite of joy that exists. And then you can see the contrast in between.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. Yeah. I was thinking about, for example, like how much I am loving. I could lose myself entirely in looking at peonies. Peonies are blooming here, and I could just stop and stare at them for hours and never get bored. But part of that is because we have a long winter and I miss the flowers in the winter. I love winter for its own special brand
Yes.
of special, but then everything becomes green and I'm like, oh, ooh, green. And then it's pink flowers. I'm like, ooh, pink. I haven't seen pink in a while. There's a really cool book if you're interested in, if you and the folks watching are interested in like actually the science of joy. It's called Joyful, and it's really interesting. She explores joy from a multiple perspective. So, art and joy and color and joy and why gardens bring us so much joy, architecture and joy. It's so interesting. But, color is actually a really important part of like evoking our joy, just even slipping in to, reds and yellows. I like to write poetry, and I think I wrote a poem about, in the fall being consumed by reds and yellows, because really like you can lose yourself in these moments. And so, going back to that first conversation about flow and joy, joy is one of those like openings into you finding flow. So flow as a state of being is when you lose all sense of time and space. So in general, like if you were to want to begin this process of joy finding, joy seeking, start with the places that already allow for you to lose all time and space. It's the question that I ask every single person that I ever connect with in my work, is like, what is the thing you do where you lose all sense of time and space? So when you do that thing, whether it's like quilting or knitting or walking in nature or sitting and having a coffee or like sitting and just watching the water come in, right? Like you lose all sense of time and space. What's actually happening in that moment, like the science of flow, is that the skills you have meet the challenge that you're given. And you would never think that like joy actually has anything to do with skills and challenge, but it does. It has a lot to do with it. And when we lose all sense of time and space, it's when we're in this like beautiful section in the middle where our skills perfectly balance with the challenges that we're faced with. So what will happen is sometimes our skills we don't have enough skills for the challenges that we're facing. And if that happens, we will experience stress. So, stress is what comes up when we don't have the skills to match the challenge that we're being faced with. And we can resolve that all kinds of ways. That's a whole other
That's
conversation.
another set.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But the other thing that can happen is when our skills are too great for the challenge that we're being faced with, we will be bored. We'll be bored as fuck. And so, when you're looking at your own current state of being and you're thinking about this range of experience that you might be having, right? Like from an objective perspective, am I stressed or am I bored? And happiness flow happens in between stress and boredom, when your skills and the challenge meet right in the middle, like in this beautiful line, right? So when you start to learn something, so let's say, when I was starting this choir singing thing, you know there was a reason why it worked for me. Part of that was that I was able to read music. I know what music is supposed to sound like. I knew exactly what was happening. So I could slip into feeling pleasure in that moment. But another time, I went to sing in a choir and we were singing Handel's Messiah. And I don't know why I said I would do this, but I am not an opera singer. And I was having to sing like this thing that was way beyond what I was capable of doing. And it was not fun. I felt like a fish out of water. I didn't even want to play. I didn't want to sing. I felt awful about myself. So it's not just the singing that brought me joy. It was actually the songs that I was singing matched the skills that I had, and like the challenge of it was just right for me at that time. So when you're looking for joy to stimulate this feeling of flow, like ideally your play, your leisure time, the more hours of the day than not, as many minutes as you can possibly find in your day for you to slip into flow. Allow for yourself to imagine that when you're starting something new, you might not find that flow yet. Let's say you've always wanted to, well, like I've always wanted to knit. I think it's pretty cool what people can make. I love the idea of knitting myself a sweater or like a baby blanket for someone. I like that idea. But it's really hard. And so I don't really want to do it. And I
I can
actually
only do a scarf, so.
yeah, I can crochet because it's just one needle, but like two, what do you do with two? It's not fun because it's too hard. And I'm not choosing to like persist through that hard to find my flow, to like actually see my skills improve, right? So when it comes to like finding joy, and if in the moments where you're not experiencing joy, it can be a really useful tool to say, okay, am I feeling challenged enough? If I'm bored. So, if I'm watching Netflix for hours on end and hoping to feel happy, well, there's no challenge in like binge watching something, like eventually you're going to get bored. Eventually it's not going to be stimulating enough for you. Um, and then there are going to be other times where it's just too stressful, like maybe mountain biking's not for you because you're terrified of going fast down hills. You're never going to feel joy doing that. Maybe you will, but just to offer this like perspective on like your joy, that flow, this sense of timelessness and bliss and pleasure actually has a lot to do with the skills and the challenge as well.
That's a great way to look at it because it also ties in with the work that I do with the nervous system regulation,
Yeah,
is that you got to regulate at each next level of joy. So
yeah,
let's say you're learning a new language, bringing you joy might mean saying hello, but having a conversation with somebody in that language would be extremely stressful because you don't
yeah,
have the capacity to do it yet, right?
right.
But
Yeah,
if you calibrate to 10 words, now you're like, well, if someone speaks English and that language, I will say the 10 words that I know, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
then you calibrate to the next level. So like
yeah,
I think we forget that you need to increase your capacity for in your nervous system to calibrate to the next level of whether it be joy, whether it be happiness, like a
yeah,
flow that is required for you to go to the next
yeah.
step.
100%, 100%. And to like not give up, right? Not to just write
Yes.
it off as something we don't enjoy just because it's a bit hard, give ourselves a little bit of time if we want, it's your own pleasure, so do what you want. But like, there is this possibility that for a time you might need to be a little uncomfortable before you actually find the joy, right? Like when I was going through that process of finding joy in Edmonton and like looking for the joy, I started with the easy shit, like coffee that I was making in my own house. Like there's no way that a latte is not going to bring me joy. So I started with that. And then I went to baked goods because I've never met a beautiful bakery I haven't completely and utterly loved, And so I went to the bakery and then to like the next thing that was like just this like next thing that was just out of reach, like a nature spot that I hadn't been to. And then as I like began to like see, okay, yeah, 1 minute of joy. Yeah, okay, I got that. Okay, 2 minutes of joy. Oh yeah, I could have 2 minutes of joy. I could have a coffee in the morning and a baked good in the afternoon. And not that I was
Yes,
baked,
please.
yeah, not that I was doing that every day, but like you start to give yourself like this whole menu of things that bring you joy. So, and it accumulates over time. And then you build this momentum of finding joy, and then you're led to more joy. Like I was going to go to the bakery, and all of a sudden I happened upon some other new place I'd never seen. And oh my gosh, there's a mural on the side that I love. I love murals. And then I discovered there was a mural walk I could do, and I was going to all the murals. And so you just like you follow what I call these like bliss breadcrumbs. It's like a trail. Your joy is like a trail. It's going to lead you through life in any realm. It's not just in this one dimension of fun and adventure in your life. It can actually help you in all the dimensions of your life, in your relationships, in your job, in your own sense of well-being, in your health, in your exercise. Why would you do exercise that makes you feel like shit? Find exercise that feels like fun and feels like play. Maybe that's my sister, for example, has discovered that she really loves moving her body when she's not having to think about the fact that she's moving her body, like that it has some other purpose. So she's realizing, oh, I love work where I'm actually moving my body all the time. Like that's part of my job. So physical labor actually brings her a lot of joy, and plants. And so she's like working in the nursery right now and loving this newfound balance of like being able to get exercise without actually having to exercise, so it's all kind of connected. Your joy is, it's not separate from any other realm of your life.
And as we've been talking about energetics this month, like the frequency that we've been saying is when you see it and you notice it's more abundant, right? So then you get more and more and more of it. And that's how you
Yeah,
calibrate to a higher frequency of joy, or to see it
yeah,
in more moments. Because first, as you said, you only see it in a bit, but
yeah,
then your brain goes, whoa, okay, I see it. And then you see it more and more and more. And then
yeah,
soon it becomes the dominant part of who you are.
yeah, 100%. I have to say, just to like, again, like come back to um, just being an authentic human. I have not been feeling that joyful over the last few weeks. I really haven't. I don't know. I've been in a bit of a rut. But today, last night, I was like, okay, I think I'm done with this rut. And I deleted a bunch of apps off my phone because I've been spending too much time on it. And it's not been bringing me any joy really at all. And I was like, okay, today I'm going to move my body. I don't care for how long. I'm just going to go for like a 5-minute walk. I'm just, going back to
Yeah.
starting really easily, slow, starting with something really small, 1% change, right? And so I walked this morning and I met up with a friend, and that was really fun. And then we were talking about my backyard, and then she came over and I got to show her all of the things. And then I felt a bit proud of myself. And then I was like noticing I was slipping back into my own, social media vortex wormhole thing. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing this today. I've been wanting to go and visit this new shop in the Glebe that just opened. It's like a female owned business. And I was like, I have to go to this place. And I didn't know why. This is the other thing I think that's kind of cool about joy, is that sometimes it makes no sense what's going to bring us joy, or this idea that we have. I don't know why I needed to go to that place, but I did. So I drove myself to the Glebe and I was like, okay, I'm going to park farther away than I would normally because I want to look at people's houses. I love walking around a neighborhood and looking at people's their curb appeal. There's something really appealing about their curb appeal. And so I was enjoying walking through the Glebe. I never go there. Looking at all the pretty gardens and the pretty houses, and I went to the place and it was pretty. And then I went to a friend's store I hadn't been in before, and that was fun. And then I was like, I'll just walk. And I found this flower shop I didn't even know was on the street on that strip. And I went in and I was like instantly transported to this sensory experience of like, oh, wow, I'm in somewhere magical. Like the smell of the plants, and it was beautiful and green and pretty. It's so pretty. Flowers and everything. And as I was wandering around, I was chatting with the person there. I noticed this little thing on the, like this little bottle, and it had the words Shrinrin Yoku written on it, which is forest bathing in Japanese. And I'm a forest bathing guide. I don't know why I was called to go to the Glebe, but I'm 100% certain now that it was that. So I said to her, do you know what Shrinrin Yoku actually means? And she said, no, I don't know. I'm like, oh, it means forest bathing in Japanese, and I'm a guide and blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden it came up that like maybe they want to do a staff training and I'll take them forest bathing guiding. Like you never know
Yes.
where your joy is going to lead you, right? Like this is the thing. Like I had no idea why I was wanting to go to this new business, although it was really cool and feminine, female owned, like that. But like this other clues that just like kept following. And then I was all of a sudden, there was more and more excitement to be experienced. And it just felt like so good. And I walked back down another pretty street and looked at all of the curb appeal and got in my car to come have this conversation. I was like, what if I hadn't though? What if I had not chosen that yesterday, not chosen differently, like not chosen that for myself? I would have missed out on all of these things that I didn't even know were there. And I think, really when I think about joy and what has been the most impactful learning over and over again, and I still am surprised by it every single time, is that when I follow my joy, that like weird thing that says go to the
Go
place,
here.
go here, I'm always led somewhere else, and it's always for some unexpected reason that my brain cannot imagine because it's not capable of that. It's like that's the limitation of our brain's programming, is that we are not capable of predicting the unexpected things in the future, the good, amazing opportunities that there are. And, so I think, again, like when we allow ourselves to choose to find joy, what actually happens isn't joy, it's surprise and like opportunity and possibility and serendipity and magic.
Yeah,
I don't
magic.
know. Joy equals magic.
Yay! Beautiful. I think that is an amazing place to wrap up.
Yeah.
Where can they find you? Tell
Oh,
us all the things.
okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I love to spend time on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Shannon E. Clarke with an E on the end of Clark. There's a lot of E's in there. Or ShannonClarkeCoaching.com, which is my website. Um, if you're interested in wanting to play in more joy, you could come and join Euphoria. We're still going. It's a lot like the Daily Dose of Healing, so I feel like you're in really good hands with Amanda. But yeah, I love just having those kinds of conversations with folks. And if you want to go forest bathing, we'll go in the forest and find joy together. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this
Yeah.
conversation. Conversations like this is actually what brings me joy.
No, me too. Thank you for inviting me and asking me. It feels like it also brings me an immense amount of like, I don't know, purpose. There's a lot of purpose in having these conversations that about our own learnings in life.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
All right.
Thank you so much, Beauty.
Thank you.